Small businesses and ERP implementations. What is it that small and mid-market companies need to know about ERP implementations? How are they different than ERP implementations at larger organizations? That's a big part of what we're going to cover here today in our weekly live stream, our live discussion here. We're streaming to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, X, and TikTok. So thanks for joining here today, wherever you're joining. The topic today is ERP lessons from SMB implementations, and really welcome you all for being here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their digital transformation journeys, including many small and mid-market companies. So that's really the topic we're going to cover here today with our two guests, who I'm going to introduce here in just a moment. But before I introduce them, a couple quick logistical things. First of all, we're going to be taking questions. So any questions you have, I'd love to hear you drop those questions here in the chat. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind just dropping in an answer to two questions. One is, what city and country are you joining from today? And secondly, I'd love to hear what kind of business you own or are part of. What industry are you in? I'd love to hear from you in the chat here. So if you don't mind dropping that in, that'll give me a sense of who's here today and where you're from and what industry you're in. So really looking forward to hearing from you today. Our two guests are two associate directors from Third Stage Consulting, and two associate directors that tend to focus quite a bit on our small and mid-market clients. Geordie McDougall and Nate Stroeher. So guys, thanks for being here. Nate, tell us a little bit about yourself to start.
Okay, hi, I'm Nate Stroeher, and I have been in the consulting field for about 25 years and have worked everywhere from started with more of a finance focus. We did a lot of finance transformation, working primarily for the office of the CFO, and then it since have shifted my focus to include more broad spectrum, more of the change management, and focusing on some of the smaller to medium-sized business clients here at Third Stage. So happy to be on, and thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And then Geordie, thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Geordie McDougall. I'm also an associate director at Third Stage. Hopped right into consulting out of grad school. Started on the delivery side as a consultant, and then have worked up into this role. Throughout my career, I've been a part of many different selections, implementation readiness efforts, and then implementations as well. So big focus on process improvement, change management, and kind of everything else in between there.
Great. Yeah, and you've gotten to see quite a variety of industries over the years and types of different sizes of companies. I know you've worked with some larger organizations. You both have worked with some very large organizations, and you both have worked with some smaller and mid-sized organizations. So this will be fun to really compare and contrast how these small and mid-market companies compare to one another. I'm going to leave a question here for the audience. Where are you joining from? What industry are you in? So I'd love to hear in the chat if you don't mind dropping that in there. While the audience is answering that question, though, Nate, I want to start with you and talk a little bit just to get started on we'll start with the technical side of things, even though I don't usually like to do that, but we'll start there because I think a lot of people joining here today and a lot of small and mid-market companies, they come in to talk to Third Stage, and they'll ask us the question of, well, what types of technology should I be looking at if I'm a small and mid-market company? How would you compare, or how would you say small and mid-market companies differ in the types of technologies, whether it's specific vendors or the categories of technologies that they typically consider? How is that different than a larger organization?
I think that the key difference is the technologies available to a small and a medium-sized business. And not only that, the biggest challenge once you figure out what the technologies are available is taking your solution and scaling it big enough for the future so that you allow yourself to grow. So you're not shoehorning yourself into a solution that 2 to 3 years down the road, you're going to need to jump right back into upgrading to a bigger solution. So there's always that delicate balance between or amongst our small and medium-sized business clients, that you want to get big enough that you allow yourself to grow, but you don't want to outgrow your capabilities. With larger size organizations, they're usually locked into a solution that's designed more for the larger organizations. And as they grow, the system already has room for expansion. With our smaller and medium-sized business clients, we start with that first conversation, and that is, where are you now and where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? And really making sure that the solution satisfies their current needs, but allows room for growth in the future.
Yeah, that's well said. In Geordie, I don't know, do you see a pattern of like specific types of vendors that you see more commonly in small and mid-market companies compared to larger ones? I know like a large company might consider an SAP S/4HANA or a Oracle Fusion, Microsoft D365. What are some of do you see those same systems with small and mid-market companies, or do you see different ones as well?
Yeah, I think it really depends on which industry you're working within, but typically we do hear often, the NetSuites, the Acumaticas, SAP Business One, Epicor, Kinetic, lots of these familiar names, but it really does depend on what industry the organization is in, and then also what business case they're trying to solve. So maybe for some of them, it's more of a best of breed approach where they want to just connect many different solutions together rather than just having one overarching ERP system. So it really kind of ranges, but typically we hear those common names that you'd expect.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of them are, especially the smaller ones, let's call it the ones that are less than 50 or 100 million in annual revenue, give or take. They seem like a lot of them are going from like a QuickBooks, sort of a non-ERP. They've got a basic accounting system or maybe they're running on spreadsheets, or maybe it's some combination of different technologies. But then it seems like a lot of these small and mid-market companies that we work with, it's their first ERP rollout. And that's really what I want to hone in on is, how is that different, or what should you expect if you're transitioning from like a QuickBooks or a Xero or spreadsheets, paper, whatever you're using? How do you transition from that to an ERP system? And how is that different than doing it at a large multinational company? And so that's what we'll get to here today. I want to turn to the audience real quick and just say hello to a few people that have chimed in. Thanks to those that are already commenting to my question on where you're joining from, what industry you're in. Leonard on LinkedIn is joining from Nairobi, Kenya, in international development. Thanks for being here today, Leonard. We have Luke on LinkedIn joining from Durban, South Africa. He's a Treasury One implementation consultant, and love to hear your feedback, Luke, on what you see in the small and mid market as well. Saeed on LinkedIn is joining from Paris. He joins European companies in the integration of Dynamics 365, Business Central, and F&O. That's a really interesting point because Microsoft Dynamics has two solutions within D365. You have F&O, which is finance and operations for larger organizations, and then you have Business Central, which is typically more of a small and mid-market solution that competes commonly with NetSuite and other some of the systems you just mentioned, Geordie. Dan Fury joining on LinkedIn from Chicago, IT consulting, and more specifically, he's IT consulting at Third Stage Consulting. So thanks for being here today, Dan. We also have Lean joining from LinkedIn from the Netherlands. Service and parts, logistics, and industrial equipment is his area of expertise, or his industry. And then Brian from Denver, Colorado on LinkedIn, been on both the software and service side of D365. We have Owusu on YouTube joining from the multimedia industry. And we also have Dennis joining from, I almost blocked you, Dennis. Sorry, I did not mean to block you if I did. Dennis joining on LinkedIn from India. So thanks for being here today, Dennis. And then we have someone else joining from Germany, although I can't see who it is for some reason. Sometimes my stream thing doesn't show me the names of people, but someone on LinkedIn is joining from Germany. So whoever you are, thanks for being here today, if you know who you are. So thanks everyone for chiming in on where you're joining from today. So what about, I want to dive into this a little bit more and talk about successful versus troubled implementations at small and mid-market companies. What do you guys think is the most common thread with the successful implementations and ERP deployments at a small and mid-market company? And it may or may not be the same thing that you would say for a large multinational company, but what would you say the keys to success are in this market? Maybe I'll start with you, Nate.
Yeah, I think the number one is realistic expectations of the capabilities of your resources to handle this change and to handle the effort that's required for an engagement like this. Mostly the individuals that you have selected to participate in these ERP projects are going to be the business leads and the functional leaders. And they obviously, the phrase that is always thrown around is they have their day job and they have the job that we're trying to, of the implementation. So I think it's really important from the beginning that you sit down and realistically say, given the resources that we have now, can we adequately staff this project, and can we adequately do our day jobs? We have had a lot of success getting around this challenge by introducing temporary employees or in the success of the small and the medium business size level of adding someone to the organization, starting them off with this software implementation. Their initial few months is more of the day-to-day busy work as they start to get used to the organization and the system, and then they can roll into more of the expert. They can become a subject matter expert on the software, on the organization, and really roll into a full-time role. So I think really, first and foremost always is sitting down and saying, do you have the time? Do you have the right people? And how can you supplement those people going forward?
Yeah. What would you add to that, Geordie?
Yeah, I would just say having a committed executive sponsor leadership team, just in general, making sure that they're there to be the guiding light. They're outlining the business case or the target operating model and working with all of the different stakeholders within the company. But having that executive leadership really being that guiding light and ensuring that they're clearing any roadblocks that might be getting in the way of the project, and just having that leadership support to really make sure that the project can start off on a good foot, but also continue through with strong momentum.
Yeah. And I agree with all that. And I think the other thing too is the fact that most small and mid-market companies, especially the ones that are growing quickly, they usually have limited resources and don't have a lot of bench time and available capacity to invest what they need to invest in these projects. So in addition to having that executive level support, or maybe as a result of having that executive level support, you need to ensure that translates into ensuring you free up the right resources to help with the project. The other thing I'd say too, this is a kind of a tricky balancing act with a lot of small and mid-market companies. Is a lot of them roll out ERP systems because they want to scale the company and they know that they can't continue to grow and be successful without their current systems and their current manual processes and limited technologies holding them back. So they end up wanting to buy a more robust, more sophisticated ERP system that will allow them to scale. But it seems like there's a bit of a balancing act that's tricky there, as far as making sure you don't overcomplicate things and sort of slow down your business to a grinding halt because you've overcomplicated things with an over-engineered ERP solution versus, you want something that's going to improve you, give you more scalability, but not so much so that it just, it's overkill for who you are and who you're trying to be in the short term. So have you guys seen organizations struggle with that, or how have you seen them navigate just the decisions around, are we going for long-term scale? How do we balance out long-term scale that we need in the future versus who we are today and the realities of who we are today and the flexibility and the nimbleness we have today? Have you guys seen that be a challenge with small and mid-market companies?
Yeah, for sure.
I think. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, you go.
No, I think, and Geordie, definitely, we've seen this, and he and I have been involved in and talking to a lot of organizations over the last few months. So we'll kind of tag team this answer. But I think that one of the most important things is to take off bite-size chunks as you go. So if you are going from, again, Eric, you mentioned QuickBooks, and I can't tell you, probably 90 to 95% of our calls, QuickBooks has something to do with either the past or the future of the organization. They've used QuickBooks. So when you go in from a software package like QuickBooks to an ERP, I think it's really important to not try and get all the functionality out of your new platform that you're implementing. Set a realistic time frame for going live and getting basic functionality and getting a good feel for the system. And then in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, really starting to add some of the functionality, some of the dashboard capabilities, some of the reporting capabilities that these platforms offer. And with the addition of artificial intelligence, with the addition of the ease of creating dashboards and reports, I think it often can get very overwhelming when you start to think about what you want. So we often tell our clients, get the package in, get comfortable with it, get your feet on the ground, and then start to look at what the system can do going forward. So don't expect a full 100% solution at go live. Really try and build up to that in the first year and a half.
Right, and just to add to that also, I would say that kind of ties in well to the selection of the ERP system. So ensuring that you can not only get up and running with whatever you select, but also making sure that you can grow into the system as well. So making sure that it's fit for your scalability so that you can begin to add some different modules and different pieces of technology, such as that AI piece that Nate mentioned. You want to make sure that you're selecting your vendor for right now, but also for the future as well.
Yeah. And taking it in bite-sized chunks and pacing yourself is important. And, it's hard because you've got to, during the evaluation process, you have to think a little bit bigger picture, a little bit longer term. But then when it comes time to procure the software and start rolling it out, you sort of want to back up and look more myopically at shorter term. How can I get immediate value? Knowing what the long-term roadmap is, how can I get immediate value without overcomplicating things or without bringing our operations to a halt because all my people are tied up in a big, massive, complex ERP implementation. What about timeframes? I feel like timeframes, you mentioned upfront, Nate, realistic expectations. First of all, let's start there. I mean, you talked about realistic expectations, and one of the expectations that we often see get misaligned or people get out of sync on is on timeline. So a lot of smaller businesses think, we're small, it's not that complicated. And that is true. You aren't as complicated as a larger counterpart. But I think in the small and mid-market, I feel like expectations are more mismanaged or even more mismanaged than they are with big companies, because I think, in my opinion, and I want to see what you guys think, whether you agree or disagree on this, but it seems like a lot of times, software vendors will come in with a small business offering that makes it sound really enticing as far as, I'll pick on NetSuite for a moment, although this is not limited to NetSuite, even though I'm picking on them right now. But Oracle NetSuite will come in and say, we've got suite success. We can roll out the system in 90 days. That's sort of their MO. And they probably can implement technology in 90 days, but your ability to change and train your people and change your processes and get operational and functioning on that technology typically is going to take a lot more than 90 days. So what advice do you guys have for organizations in terms of managing expectations and just making sure they're realistic about the time and cost and complexity and risk and all that stuff that they're taking on with these sorts of projects?
Geordie, I'll let you jump in on that one first. Yeah.
Okay. I would just say the first piece would be understanding that you don't know what you don't know. So going into one of these implementations, you obviously want to be able to implement as fast as possible, but really starting with that phase 0 and making sure that you lay the proper groundwork to set up that implementation for success is very vital. And oftentimes it's you can refer to this as going slow to go fast. So you really want to make sure that you build that foundation at first, making sure that you're really documenting these processes, whether they're the current state or moving forward into the future state processes, making sure that you have those mapped out in a well-defined manner. And then also looking at your resourcing. I know we've already touched on this a couple of times, but when you're working in the SMB space, resourcing can be a challenge. So oftentimes these really short timelines demand high volume or lots of hours per day going towards the project. So trying to juggle all these different pieces can be a challenge. And that's where we really bring in that level setting expectation to really understand what can the organization take on, and looking at the change management, the training side of things as well. What can we absorb in this amount of time to make sure that once we go live, we're actually reaching that full ROI. We're making sure that we're using the software correctly and how we plan and how we set out to use it. So expectation setting really kind of is overarching throughout all these different aspects, and it's really important.
Yeah. Good point. What would you add to that, Nate?
I think that the biggest thing to add to that, and Geordie hinted on it, is you can. I always say that you have you have a defined set of tasks that you need to complete for an implementation. We've had clients that have had sort of that burning platform, for lack of a better phrase, that they need to get a system implemented quickly. So that's those rapid implementations, the suite success. That's what those, I think, are very good at, is that you need to get off of QuickBooks, or you have an owner that has given you a deadline that you need to meet. But what we always tell our clients is that with those quick implementations, you're really shifting a lot of the work to the back end. So you're shifting a lot of the effort to post go live. So you might get that bare bones system now, but you're really then shifting everything to trying to go through and fix everything or configure everything afterwards. So slow to go fast is a great way to put it, that Geordie mentioned earlier. And that is sitting down and really actually coming up with your requirements and getting a good understanding of where you are. I always say that when you do that, you're able to move a lot faster once you've hit that mark. So again, kind of getting your shoes tied and getting ready, and then you can take off for the sprint versus trying to get everything moving while you're running down the trail.
Yeah. And again, getting back to the resource thing, I mean, most small and mid-market companies don't have a lot of bench time, people just sitting around waiting for that next big ERP project to take on. So that makes it even more challenging, because they're typically even leaner than a big company. When you've got a smaller, high growth company. Here's a question from YouTube, from the audience here on, this is from Tabin on YouTube. He says, what are the drivers of small business skills for newly initiated businesses? And maybe what I'll add to that, or maybe tweak or spin that a little bit differently, is on the skill set side of things. What sorts of skills should a small and mid-market company be thinking about building internally, and what are the skills that they need to expect to probably bring in from the outside? Like when you're trying to manage these projects, can you do it all yourself? Could you just outsource it to someone like Third Stage or a software vendor or whatever? Is it some mix of both? What do you guys think?
I think the key is that with the technology solutions and the platforms that are out there today, I think there's a real divide between technical resources and general resources. And I would say that when you talk about from an organizational point of view, I think if you're hiring individuals to be a part of this engagement, they really don't need extreme technical skills on the software package you're implementing. So don't get hung up on finding a Infor specialist or a Microsoft specialist, but get someone that's really comfortable with technology and comfortable with change. On the flip side, from the system integrator point of view, there are technical resources that obviously are needed to help set up the software, configure the software, dig through the requirements. And then you have that general layer, which is really the business understanding. So that's really more of the PMO and the resources that are guiding it from the organization or from the business point of view. So if you can have someone that can really stay comfortable with what the business needs are, and they're comfortable with technology, and then you have that real set technical reference that's going to go through and work with the intricacies of the package, that's really where we try and build our clients up for the best success, is putting that team together with that mix.
Yeah. Do you add anything to that, Geordie?
Yeah, and just kind of a sidebar note from that would be, oftentimes throughout an implementation, this can present an opportunity for leadership development within a company. So lots of times you may feel like you're a little bit lean with your resources, but you might have up and coming employees that can take on this challenge and really develop some leadership skills, and driving the direction of the business, taking on some of that ownership, and really using that as a leadership development exercise to really make sure that you're not only improving your business and your technology, but also your resources and your people within the company, really upskilling these people, really empowering them. And that's oftentimes what leads to the most successful implementations, is when everybody feels a part of it and really taking on ownership.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really, really well said. And a good point is, finding those, because you want people that are hungry, up and coming, that have a view of how things could be. And you also want people that understand the current business and why you do things the way you do, but you don't want someone that's so entrenched in the way you've always done it that they can't think outside of that. So sometimes the people that are sort of moving up in their career, that maybe are early to mid career, sometimes those people can provide a different perspective, that you may not get from some of your more tenured employees or more established employees. So that's really well said. So I want to ask the audience too. I'm curious to hear from the audience. What do you think the keys to success at small and mid-market companies are when you're looking at ERP implementations? What are the things that you've seen be successful? I know we've got some consultants that are listening in, and some software vendor related people. So I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think the keys to success are. What makes successful small and mid-market implementations? How's that different than what you might expect to see at a larger counterpart as well? So shifting gears a little bit, Nate, you talked about AI a minute ago. I think you mentioned it in passing, but I want to come back to that thread. We've all heard about AI. There's a lot of buzz and hype around it. Some of it is founded hype in reality. Some of it is just hype. But with small and mid-market companies, like, what's the general perception? Because you guys are talking to a lot of, you guys talk to a lot of small and mid-market companies that first approach us before they even become clients of Third Stages. So they come to us with a problem statement, they're like, hey, we need to replace our ERP system. And then the question becomes, well, why? And then you guys dig into the understanding of the client or the potential client and what their needs are. But how many of them are they thinking about AI? Are they skeptical of it? Are they excited about it and maybe trying to bite off more than they could chew? Like, how would you say the state of AI sits with this market, with the smaller and mid-market companies, as far as just what their perceptions are?
Well, I think it's typical of the entire market, and that is there's a lot of people are still very uncertain of just exactly what AI means, what will do for them, and how it relates to their organization. So I think what we traditionally try to guide our potential clients and our current clients are, to really sit down and, again, get a real clear understanding of what your requirements are and what your business needs are, and look at this technology solutions that you're going to implement, and get comfortable with that from the beginning. And then as we've seen even internally at Third Stage, it's getting comfortable with what the AI tools are that are out there that are available. So, just to implement AI because everyone's doing it, that doesn't make sense. But really sitting down and saying, what are some of our limitations, or what with the platforms that we're implementing, are there limitations, or are there ways to expand its capabilities? And what exactly is that? Get a good understanding of that, and then go through and say, how can we match the horsepower that we have with AI with the needs that we have, or with some of the future wish list items that we have, and really kind of then start to slowly move into that. But I think just to implement AI, or just to implement the tools that with those capabilities, is really a mistake. I think it's more important to sit down and say, what do we want, or what that we want together.
Yeah. What do you think, Geordie, when you're talking to particularly when you first talk to a potential client, how often are you hearing AI come up from them? I know we could talk about it all day, but how often are they saying, hey, we really want to figure out how to use AI in our business? Or are they more just, more not even at that point yet? Or how would you describe their interest in AI?
Yeah, I think almost everyone is curious about AI and is wondering how they can, immerse it into their organization and how they can leverage some of its benefits. But just kind of like what Nate was saying, there's levels to being able to fully maximize AI. And oftentimes when we're working with these small, mid-sized businesses, and they're coming to us and we're starting to, talk through how AI might be able to solve some of their problems, it kind of starts with data is the first piece, making sure that their data is clean and it's in a centralized location, so that artificial intelligence can leverage that data to really give them the outcomes that they're looking to receive. So lots of times it's kind of going back and really making sure that we can clean up the data first before even really opening that conversation to AI. You look at something like demand forecasting, of course we'd love to use AI to leverage that, but it starts with the data. You need at least, let's say a year's worth of data to be able to pull on from the past to then come up with these demand forecasting reports. So that's just a brief example in the way that, there's foundations and there's levels to building up to that AI point. And it's usually a pretty open conversation. I mean, many of these business leaders understand this, but it's just a matter of kind of trying to map out the timing of when we could start to look at AI and how that would look.
Yeah. That makes sense. And it's, sometimes it seems like the small and mid-market is a little more skeptical of technology than in a good way. And many times it's a good thing where they sort of take it with a grain of salt a little bit more, or they, because they've got a business to run. And, a lot of times it's a smaller group of people. They're just trying to do their jobs, and, they don't want to get too distracted by whatever the newest buzzword is. But I think there are a lot of opportunities for even small businesses to take advantage of AI, which is pretty cool, because now all of a sudden it feels like with AI, the good thing about it is it brings such a powerful capability to the masses. You don't have to be a big company to really take advantage of AI. You don't even have to have a big fancy ERP system necessarily to take advantage of AI, especially when you get into generative AI and some of the day-to-day workflows that you could be embedding Copilot, or, a tool you may already have. You could start using AI in some ways like that, which is pretty cool. And I don't remember a technology in my career where that was the case, where it was just as accessible to smaller companies as it is to larger ones. A couple of comments here coming in from the audience. This is in response to your comment, Geordie. This is from Alcinda on LinkedIn. Says, such a fresh, understated perspective, how this kind of change is an opportunity for leadership development. I agree. That's a really well said, or well stated statement there around how you can use it as an opportunity to grow your team and to grow your next layer of leadership within the business. Another question here from Dan on LinkedIn. Dan says, before implementation is also a time to consider process optimization, capture the pain points in the current state, identify the root causes, and translate them to initiatives to improve the organization. And Dan, for those that don't know, is a process guy who's on our third stage team. So he tends to look at things oftentimes through the process lens. But I want to ask maybe a follow-up to Dan's comment here, in that, how broken, when you look at a small and mid-market company, are their processes as broken? And is what Dan is saying here, is that as important for a smaller company that hasn't been around as long, perhaps, versus like a large company that's been around and they've had lots of time to, for lack of a better word, screw up their processes and let them get outdated?
I think that what we hear oftentimes is that the client will come to us and say, we don't really have necessarily processes. We're looking to just kind of re-engineer all of them. We're not tied to anything. We really want to just make sure that we select a solution that we can really use, and then we almost want to adopt some of the best practice processes that the solution has out of the box. And that's kind of a fine line there. I mean, the term best practice is kind of a little bit of an interesting word in the industry, but I think it's something that you can really leverage, especially as a small to mid-sized business. Obviously, you're still going to have your unique requirements that make up your secret sauce that got you to this point, but there are also ways that you can leverage those best practice processes and kind of integrate the two to build out these future state processes where maybe you're not looking so much at the current state because that it's very manual. It's kind of shooting from the hip, and that's that entrepreneurial spirit that got the company to where it's at. But now it's that merging of, what are the best practices, what's offered out of the box, out of these given, let's say, top 3 softwares you're looking at, and then how can we integrate the unique requirements and maybe configure some of these processes to fit you, to make sure that you're still unique and still, leveraging that secret sauce that makes the organization successful.
Yeah, that's good point. I wonder though if like with NetSuite or Acumatica is another system you guys mentioned earlier on, or Microsoft Business Central. You look at these systems and they're pretty flexible. I mean, nowadays these systems are getting more and more flexible where you can do basic configuration. You can use low code, no code development tools to, to change the way the software works or change the workflow to modify to fit your business without necessarily changing the source code. And these cloud providers are getting better at providing those tools that give you that flexibility. But with that flexibility comes a challenge that you're alluding to, Geordie, which is, well, then what's best practice? If I have to go in and define what the workflow is anyway to fit my business, then what exactly is best practice? And so, that's the tricky part when, when you do what Dan said, and I'll pull up his comment again, because he has a lot of packed in here, but he talks about capturing pain points in the current state, identifying root causes, and then translating them to initiatives to improve the organization. I think what he's talking about here is really important because you want to have that sort of blueprint or roadmap and vision of what you want to be operationally. And in Geordie, you used the term target operating model a few minutes ago. It's the same kind of thing. Like how do we define what we want to be when we grow up, and what do we want this to look like? And then how do we use the technology to support that? If you go in cold and just say, we'll just take the software and use it the way we want, you still have a bunch of decisions you have to make. And that's what's going to slow down your project and make it cost more, is you taking the time to decide that stuff midstream while the vendor's waiting for you to tell you what to build, basically. So I think it's a tricky balancing act that a lot of small businesses smaller businesses don't fully understand how it affects their business and their overall initiative. Here's a question from LinkedIn. Darian on LinkedIn asked the question here: what's one achievable AI use case for a mid-market company just getting started? And maybe, I'll broaden that a little bit, whether or not you're just getting started as a small business or you've been around for a while. Do you guys have examples of where AI is actually being used? Or if you don't yet, because it is so new and we're just getting through that first big wave of implementations involving AI since it hit the mainstream. If not, what are maybe an example or two that you're seeing the vendors offer small and mid-market companies that seem intriguing to you guys?
I think one of the biggest areas where AI can help you is through reporting and analytics. Once you get a good platform in place, and once you get a strong knowledge of what the system is, what was traditionally, even probably 5 years ago, you needed someone with a really good reporting background to sit down and write your reporting and develop your analytic tools that you're going to be using in the future. AI has really allowed you to, and I don't want to simplify it to get down into these what if scenarios, but AI has really allowed you to sit down and say, I'd like to look at this, I'd like to look at this, and I'd like to see what the overall effect of the general market is on our sales, or what the overall effect is on the demand or the supply side of our business. So really, like if you look at, I was just reading an article about the capability of AI using Excel spreadsheets, and how a common user like us can sit down now and write some really amazing graphs and reports on Excel. You take that to the next level with an ERP package and the AI components that are embedded in the platforms that people are implementing. It really gives them an idea and a platform and a way to sit down and say, okay, we'd like to look at our business this way, and we'd like to look at our business this way. You can do all this without having an expensive report writer or having that expertise within your organization.
Yeah, that's a good point. How about you, Geordie? Are you seeing any cool examples of how AI is or could be used for smaller businesses?
I kind of would just echo what Nate was saying there with the reporting, being able to slice and dice information and really get to that answer that you're looking to get to in such a quick, automatic response way. But that was kind of the main one that I would say and really say is beneficial for lots of different companies.
Yeah. I wonder if there's
the one thing actually.
Go ahead, Nate.
The one thing I will, and I just thought of this.
Oh, no, we lost him right as he was getting into the good stuff. Let me add him back here.
Oh, there we go. Am I back?
There you are. All right.
Okay, sorry about that. We actually had a building supply client here in Denver, and it was a really interesting use of some of the AI capabilities. And they traditionally purchased and knew that their demand for building products were pretty seasonal. So they knew that in spring, people were going to start their construction projects. They knew that traditionally in Colorado, a hailstorm might come through, so they were going to need more roofing material. What they actually had the capability after they implemented a new ERP package and some of the AI intelligence that was embedded in that was to actually look at the effects of some of the National Weather Service predictions on storms and on the storm season to know that we were going to be heading into a more stormy summer here in Colorado. So likely we were going to have more need for building materials, for roofing materials. So it really took that, what was just kind of a simple way to look at their business, and that was seasonality. And they were actually able to start tying it to National Weather Service data, and to really now start to not only know that they were going to need to make those seasonal adjustments, but they were going to be able to really lock in on what those adjustments were and make it more of a monthly operation on purchasing material and predicting demand going forward. So it really kind of shifted it from a kind of a static model to an ever adjusting model based on some external data that AI was able to pull in.
Yeah, it seems like anything to do with forecasting and planning, those are really good AI use cases, just because it typically involves so many data sources and so much complexity trying to make sense of it that the human brain oftentimes can't make sense of it. And even Excel spreadsheets can't make sense of it, or the Excel spreadsheets break when you try to make sense of it. And so having a tool like AI is pretty cool, because I think it's been that, that sort of utopia that every business wants, is to be able to predict demand and predict their or forecast their production, forecast their financial results. Trying to get some more of that forward-looking view versus the backward-looking BI reporting side of things that ERP systems have historically provided. So I think that's a pretty cool game changer, is on the forward-looking stuff, as far as planning and forecasting. Here's a question from Saeed on LinkedIn that's interesting here. Saeed says, we've always been taught to stick to ERP standards when integrating, but what are the key triggers that justify custom developments for a specific business need, especially if you're a smaller business? And, Geordie, I think you made the comment earlier that smaller companies oftentimes are, maybe I'm paraphrasing what I think I heard you say, but I think you said they're more likely to maybe adapt to what the software can do versus trying to recreate the wheel and try and force the software to fit, their way of doing business. Have there been examples where that just doesn't work, where you have specific, unique business needs that the ERP system just can't handle, and you need to change the software to fit your business, and it's not ideal, but it's better than watering down, the way you do things today? Have you seen that in some businesses in the past?
Yeah, no, I have. And there's actually an implementation that I'm on right now where they have a very unique pricing model. And it's really a unique pricing model that doesn't really fit into any ERP systems, to be quite frank. So they actually had to go out to the marketplace and hone in and look for a specific pricing solution to fit the needs of their business. And, earlier I referenced, the secret sauce and unique requirements that make up an organization. This is one of their different differentiators that they need to hang on to. So they can't really adapt or change the way that they're pricing their services, just because that's what separates them from the competition. So they, rather than customizing the ERP or adjusting their processes, they actually went out to the marketplace to find a best of breed pricing solution to really fit the needs of those select unique requirements. And that's one way that we see lots of clients, whether that's in the SMB space or this example is a larger multi-billion-dollar company, but you see it across the board that there are certain requirements that are unique, and you kind of have to keep those because that's what makes up your business as what it is today. So that's that kind of the fine line, and where you need to start to make those strategic decisions based on, where you're going to house these certain operations to make sure that you're still operating how you want to be.
Yeah. And I know which client you're talking about there. And it sort of brings up another thought or question here around single ERP system that can do everything, or multiple systems that can do certain things really well, and then you tie together those systems. I know with larger organizations, it's more common, and we're seeing a movement with larger organizations where they say, one single monolithic ERP system is not the answer for us. We'd rather have more of a interoperability sort of model, or a best of breed model, where we take maybe some of our legacy systems, we replace them, and some of our legacy systems, maybe we keep them, even if it's just in the short term, but we tie those systems together and maybe layer on some AI tools on top of it. And so we see some movement away from the single ERP system, traditional way of thinking about ERP systems in the bigger clients of ours. But in small and mid-market clients, how do they navigate this decision? Should it be expected that you could probably find an ERP system that does everything you need because you've got less mature and less established processes, so it's easier for you to change? Or do small and mid-market companies also need to consider potentially more of a best of breed, where I go out and I find a really good CRM system that does everything I need, and then I go find a financial system, and et cetera, different tools to do different things? What are your thoughts on that whole navigating single ERP, multiple systems? How do you navigate that as a small business?
But I think the key, and this, again, sorry for using an overused consulting phrase, but I think really the key is you've got to make sure that the technology is supporting the business, and not the other way around. So not that you're adjusting your business based on your technology needs. And I say that because I think when it comes down to it, and if you have a technology like a single ERP package that can really support the entire business, there's going to be some areas within the business that are going to be affected, because you're not going to be able to satisfy everyone 100%, no matter what the platform is. But I think really it's sitting down, and when we start with our clients, we sit down with that executive visioning session, and it's really, again, trying to look at what are the exact needs of the company. So we had, for example, a client a few years ago that were very member-based, service-based training. And when it was all said and done, we were originally going to help them with an ERP package, but sat down and said, what's really most important is that CRM piece of the package. So can we put in sort of that best of breed CRM package, and can we put in just more of a vanilla financial package and really allow the business to be supported by that CRM package, which is really the strength and really where they needed most of their adaptability and adjustability. And really, at the end of the day, the financial package didn't really need any adjustments. It needed to be a very cookie cutter implement, just the solution that was there. So I think it's really sitting down and, again, asking that question of how do we really need to be supported as a business? Can that be taken care of with a package that's out of the box ERP, or do we need to adjust the technology to support our business?
Yeah. Jed, anything to that, Geordie?
No, I mean, one of our other directors, Mitch, he often kind of uses this analogy where you're looking to plug a hole in a boat. So each organization is looking to plug that hole. So, whether it's multiple different best of breed solutions that's going to plug that hole, or if it's a large ERP that can plug most of it, and then maybe there's still a couple little holes that you want to fill in. So you have lots of flexibility in today's day and age, and it's really, what helps you get to that business case that you're looking to solve and the most efficiently. So kind of echoing what Nate said, you have flexibility and what's the best fit.
Yeah. Really well said. What about the warning signs? Like if I'm going through an ERP project as a smaller mid-market company, what are some of the warning signs that things might be getting off track, or that I might be headed for trouble, even if it's not clear? What are some of those early signs that we would see that a lot of times a small and mid-market company that's never been through a project like this, perhaps, what are the things they should be mindful of or watching out for as warning signs or red flags?
Well, I would say that looking at your scope and making sure that your scope isn't shifting and moving as the project moves forward, you really want to be able to define each phase, whether if you're phasing out your implementation and really sticking to that scope. Oftentimes that's a bit of a red flag when you start to cut some scope or add scope throughout the project, that can really show some warning signs that the implementation may be heading off the tracks. Obviously, there's going to be evolution throughout the project where you might add some scope with new developments and new understanding, but that's not typically standard. So that would be definitely one warning sign. And then the other would be making sure that the organization is taking ownership of their project. I mean, it is the business's project. The vendor is coming in, they're there to support you and make sure that it's being implemented, but making sure that the decisions and really the whole implementation is being driven by the organization and not just being deferred to the vendor, because that can also lead to some turmoil down the road during an implementation as well.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, Nate? Anything you'd add to that?
I think the key is that there's on any, and we're here at a client this week, and I think with any implementation or with any technology change, there's going to be slips in the timeline. There's going to be slips in the budget, but really coming up with a good plan for how you're going to recover and how you're going to get the project back on scope and budget. And an increase in the scope, and do we need to increase the budget? I think where organizations really start to falter is that you have a slip in the budget, you have a slip in the timeline, and you don't do anything to address getting that made up. And is it realistic to put in the recovery plan that you have in place? And we always say that one or two you can likely get away with, but when they start stacking up, then the project just slowly but surely starts to slip away from you. Mitch's example of plugging a hole in the boat is a great example, because I always say if you have a hole and you're able to plug it and you're able to move on, great. But if you just keep trying to stuff rags in it and you never really address that issue, then it's just going to get out of hand. And before you know it, you have half the boat filled with water.
Right. And if you're like me and you can't swim, that's a terrifying proposition right there.
Exactly.
That's why I don't use the boat analogy, because it freaks me out. Anyway, but it's a good one. So what, if you were to give one piece of advice to a smaller mid-market company that's just getting started on their digital journey, their ERP replacement journey, whatever it is, what one or two pieces of advice would you give, Nate? Start with you.
I would say that sit down and before you do anything, get a clear vision and get a clear team in place, all the way from the executive level down to the individuals that will be using the software for the most part. Make sure everyone's on board with where you are, where you want to be. And not only that, but within that, sitting down and taking a clear snapshot and a realistic understanding of what your capabilities are, and will those capabilities be able to get you through from where you are now to where you want to be. So doing that homework ahead of time to say, is everyone on board from the executives down, and can we do it with who we have? And if not, do we need to add resources? Do we need to add budget? And can we get to where we are now to where we want to be before you jump in and before you do anything?
Right. Yeah. What would you add to that, Geordie? What's your advice?
Yeah, I would just add that it's much larger than just evaluating and selecting a software. Kind of like what Nate was saying, there's much more preparation work that needs to take place. Making sure, have you clearly defined what success looks like for this project? Technology aside, what does success look like? Do you have the available resources? Also, like what Nate was mentioning there, if not, how can we mitigate that with backfilling, maybe going out and hiring some new roles, things like that. And then the last piece would be just looking at your processes, trying to see if you can define them before you go into the implementation, so that you don't need to pause and slow down and start to work on lots of this process reengineering and things like that. So lots of preparation and just seeing the bigger picture, understanding that it's much larger than just technology. Those would be kind of my guiding words.
Yeah, it's good advice. And then I would add, just, reiterating some of what you said, what you guys both said, just making sure you've got realistic expectations, making sure you realize that it's going to be tricky to balance, your need or want to scale your company and create some standardization using these tools, but at the same time, not going so far or making such a big change that you're disrupting your business day to day. And then actually the audience, this is a comment from Andreas on LinkedIn, has a kind of a good closing comment here. So he says, naked truth, ERP project success is defined by customer dedication and competence and less by consultants. I think that's well said, which is strange because we're all three consultants. But I think that's true that you have to have, yes, you want outside expertise to help you and guide you, but you need that internal competency. And if it means upskilling, if it means developing your leadership team or developing your people a little bit more, than great. If it means bringing in resources from the outside, that's great. You can do that as well. And then here's another comment, just sort of closing the loop here on what it takes to be successful. This is from Camilo on LinkedIn. Says SMBs tend to be less structured with more flexible processes, and make sure the ERP follows that. And I think that's a really important point because, again, it's that balancing act. You may want to become a little bit more structured, a little bit not less flexible because you don't like flexibility, but because you need repeatable processes. So I think understanding what are the things that you can realistically and you should realistically standardize and change versus the things that you want to retain flexibility on, because sometimes ERP systems can actually constrain your flexibility and make it difficult for a small, nimble organization to adapt quickly. And you want to make sure you don't end up in that situation where your ERP system is actually holding you back. And as cool as modern technology is, it does do that sometimes unintentionally. That's the unintended consequence of modern technology. Sometimes it can limit your ability to remain flexible. So just making sure you find that right system that can help you do that, because some systems are more standard than others. Some are more flexible and have more low-code, no-code development tools and that sort of thing that gives you that flexibility. And that's why companies like Odoo have done really well in the marketplace, because it's a bit more of a flexible solution. Microsoft has their Business Central, which is relatively flexible. So I think, those are the things you want to think about. But if you want more structure and you're trying to scale and really grow, quickly and get to that next level and act a little bit more like a bigger company, then that's where a product like a NetSuite might be more suitable for you. So you really just have to look at what you want. And it's not just one answer either. It may be a combination of, a core ERP system that provides structure and standardization, but then you've got other systems on top of it that are more flexible. And there's just a million ways you can skin that cat. So anyway, so I appreciate you guys being here today. This is a really good conversation. I appreciate the great comments from the audience here today. If you'd like to learn more about some of the leading systems in the marketplace and the things you should be aware of as far as trends, market trends, industry technology trends, check out our digital transformation report. You can scan this QR code right here in front of you and download that for free off our website. I'll include links below in the description field as well. And Nate bailed early because he didn't want to answer any last minute questions here apparently. There, he's back. So be sure to scan that QR code if you'd like to learn more about how to make your project successful and just some of the trends to be aware of. It also contains some independent reviews and rankings of different ERP systems in the marketplace. So be sure to scan that or go to the links below to check out that report. So thanks guys for being here. Really appreciate it. And look forward to having you on again at some point soon. Thank you to the audience. This interview will become part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So we'll edit this, we'll add some more content to it, and then we'll re-release it next week as a formal, polished episode of Transformation Ground Control. You can actually see all of our past episodes of that show by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And we do this every Tuesday, same time, same place. So hope to see you there.